The Human Cycle. Chapter 8. Civilization and Barbarism. Once we have determined that this rule of perfect individuality and perfect reciprocity is the ideal law for the individual, the community, and the race, and that a perfect union and even oneness in a free diversity is its goal, we have to try to see more clearly what we mean when we say that self-realization is the sense, secret or overt, of individual and of social development. As yet we have not to deal with the race, with mankind, as a unity. The nation is still our largest compact and living unit. And it is best to begin with the individual. Both because of his nature we have a completer and nearer knowledge and experience than of the aggregate soul and life, and because the society or nation is, even in its greater complexity, a larger, a composite individual, the collective man. What we find valid of the former is therefore likely to be valid in its general principle of the larger entity. Moreover, the development of the free individual is, we have said, the first condition for the development of the perfect society. From the individual, therefore, we have to start. He is our index and our foundation. The self of man is a thing hidden and occult. It is not his body, it is not his life. It is not, even though he is in the scale of evolution the mental being, the Manu, his mind. Therefore neither the fullness of his physical, nor of his vital, nor of his mental nature can be either the last or the true standard of his self-realization. They are means of manifestation, subordinate indications, foundations of his self-finding, values, practical currency of his self, what you will, but not the thing itself, which he secretly is, and is obscurely groping, or trying overtly and self-consciously to become. Man has not possessed, as a race, this truth about himself, does not now possess it, except in the vision and self-experience of the few, in whose footsteps the race is unable to follow, though it may adore them as avatars, seers, saints, or prophets. For the Oversoul, who is the master of our evolution, has his own large steps of time, his own great eras, tracts of slow and courses of rapid expansion, which the strong, semi-divine individual may overleap, but not the still half-animal race. The course of evolution, proceeding from the vegetable to the animal, from the animal to the man, starts in the latter from the subhuman. he has to take up into him the animal, and even the mineral and vegetable. They constitute his physical nature. They dominate his vitality. They have their hold upon his mentality. His proneness to many kinds of inertia, his readiness to vegetate, his attachment to the soil and clinging to his roots, to safe anchorages of all kinds, and on the other hand, his nomadic and predatory impulses, his blind servility to custom and the rule of the pack, his mob movements, and openness to subconscious suggestions from the group soul, his subjection to the yoke of rage and fear, his need of punishment and reliance on punishment, his inability to think and act for himself, his incapacity for true freedom, his distrust of novelty, his slowness to seize intelligently and assimilate, his downward propensity and earthward gaze, his vital and physical subjection to his heredity, all these and more are his heritage from the subhuman origins of his life and body and physical mind. It is because of this heritage that he finds self-exceeding the most difficult of lessons and the most painful of endeavors. Yet it is by exceeding of the lower self that nature accomplishes the great strides of her evolutionary process. To learn by what he has been, but also to know and increase to what he can be, is the task that is set for the mental being. The time is passing away, permanently, let us hope, for this cycle of civilization, when the entire identification of the self with the body and the physical life was possible for the general consciousness of the race. That is the primary characteristic of complete barbarism. To take the body and the physical life as the one thing important, to judge manhood by the physical strength, development, and prowess, to be at the mercy of the instincts which rise out of the physical inconscient, to despise knowledge as a weakness and inferiority, or look on it as a peculiarity, and no necessary part of the conception of manhood. This is the mentality of the barbarian. It tends to reappear in the human being in the atavistic period of boyhood, when, be it noted, the development of the body is of the greatest importance. But to the adult man in civilized humanity, it is ceasing to be possible. For, in the first place, by the stress of modern life, even the vital attitude of the race is changing. Man is ceasing to be so much of a physical and becoming much more of a vital and economic animal. Not that he excludes or is intended to exclude the body and its development, or the right maintenance of and respect for the animal being and its excellences from his idea of life. The excellence of the body, its health, its soundness, its vigor, and harmonious development are necessary to a perfect manhood, and are occupying attention in a better and more intelligent way than before. But the first rank in importance can no longer be given to the body, much less that entire predominance assigned to it in the mentality of the barbarian. Moreover, although man has not yet really heard and understood the message of the sages, in quotes, know thyself, he has accepted the message of the thinker, quotes, educate thyself, end quote. And what is more, he has understood that the possession of education imposes on him the duty of imparting his knowledge to others. The idea of the necessity of general education means the recognition by the race that the mind, and not the life and the body, are the man, and that without the development of the mind, he does not possess his true manhood. The idea of education is still primarily that of intelligence and mental capacity and knowledge of the world and things, but secondarily also of moral training and, though as yet very imperfectly, of the development of the aesthetic faculties. The intelligent thinking being, moralized, controlling his instincts and emotions by his will and reason, acquainted with all that he should know of the world and his past, capable of organizing intelligently by that knowledge his social and economic life, ordering rightly his bodily habits and physical being. This is the conception that now governs civilized humanity. It is, in essence, a return to and a larger development of the old Hellenic ideal, with a greater stress on capacity and utility, and a very diminished stress on beauty and refinement. We may suppose, however, that this is only a passing phase. The lost elements are bound to recover their importance as soon as the commercial period of modern progress has been overpassed. And with that recovery, not yet in sight but inevitable, we shall have all the proper elements for the development of man as a mental being. The old Hellenic or Greco-Roman civilization perished, among other reasons, because it only imperfectly generalized culture in its own society, and was surrounded by huge masses of humanity who were still possessed by the barbarian habit of mind. Civilization can never be safe so long as, confining the cultured mentality to a small minority, it nourishes in its bosom a tremendous mass of ignorance, a multitude, a proletariat. Either knowledge must enlarge itself from above, or be always in danger of submergence by the ignorant light from below. Still more, must it be unsafe if it allows enormous numbers of men to exist outside its pale, uninformed by its light, full of the natural vigor of the barbarian, who may at any moment seize upon the physical weapons of the civilized, without undergoing an intellectual transformation by their culture. The Greco-Roman culture perished from within and from without. From without, by the floods of Teutonic barbarism; from within, by the loss of its vitality. It gave the proletariat some measure of comfort and amusement, but did not raise it into the light. When light came to the masses, it was from outside, in the form of the Christian religion, which arrived as an enemy of the old culture. Appealing to the poor, the oppressed, and the ignorant, it sought to capture the soul and the ethical being, but cared little or not at all for the thinking mind, content that should remain in darkness, if the heart could be brought to feel religious truth. When the barbarians captured the Western world, it was in the same way content to Christianize them, but made it no part of its function to intellectualize. Distrustful even of the free play of intelligence, Christian ecclesiasticism and monasticism became anti-intellectual, and it was left to the Arabs to reintroduce the beginnings of scientific and philosophical knowledge into a semi-barbarous Christendom, and to the half-pagan spirit of the Renaissance, and a long struggle between religion and science to complete the return of a free intellectual culture in the re-emerging mind of Europe. Knowledge must be aggressive if it wishes to survive and perpetuate itself. To leave an extensive ignorance either below or around it is to expose humanity to the perpetual danger of a barbaric relapse. The modern world does not leave room for a repetition of the danger in the old form or on the old scale. Science is there to prevent it. It has equipped culture with the means of self-perpetuation. It has armed the civilized races with weapons of organization and aggression and self-defense, which cannot be successfully utilized by any barbarous people, unless it ceases to be uncivilized and acquires the knowledge which science alone can give. It has learned, too, that ignorance is an enemy it cannot afford to despise, and has set out to remove it wherever it is found. The ideal of general education, at least to the extent of some information of the mind and the training of capacity, owes to it, if not its birth, at least much of its practical possibility. It has propagated itself everywhere with an irresistible force, and driven the desire for increasing knowledge into the mentality of 3 continents. It has made general education the indispensable condition of national strength and efficiency, and therefore imposed the desire of it not only on every free people, but on every nation that desires to be free and to survive, so that the universalization of knowledge and intellectual activity in the human race is now only a question of time. For it is only certain political and economic obstacles that stand in its way, and these the thought and tendencies of the age are already laboring to overcome. And in some, science has already enlarged for good the intellectual horizons of the race, and raised, sharpened, and intensified powerfully the general intellectual capacity of mankind. It is true that the first tendencies of science have been materialistic, and its indubitable triumphs have been confined to the knowledge of the physical universe, and the body, and the physical life. But this materialism is a very different thing from the old identification of the self with the body. Whatever its apparent tendencies, it has been really an assertion of man, the mental being, and of the supremacy of intelligence. Science, in its very nature, is knowledge, is intellectuality, and its whole work has been that of the mind, turning its gaze upon its vital and physical frame and environment to know and conquer and dominate life and matter. The scientist is man, the thinker, mastering the forces of material nature by knowing them. Life and matter are, after all, our standing ground, our lower basis, and to know their processes and their own proper possibilities, and the opportunities they give to the human being, is part of the knowledge necessary for transcending them. Life and the body have to be exceeded, but they have also to be utilized and perfected. Neither the laws nor the possibilities of physical nature can be entirely known unless we know also the laws and possibilities of supraphysical nature. Therefore, the development of new and the recovery of old mental and psychic sciences have to follow upon the perfection of our physical knowledge. And that new era is already beginning to open upon us. But the perfection of the physical sciences was a prior necessity, and had to be the first field for the training of the mind of man in his new endeavor to know nature and possess his world. Even in its negative work, the materialism of science had a task to perform, which will be useful in the end to the human mind in its exceeding of materialism. But science, in its heyday of triumphant materialism, despised and cast aside philosophy, its predominance discouraged by its positive and pragmatic turn the spirit of poetry and art, and pushed them from their position of leadership in the front of culture. Poetry entered into an era of decline and decadence, adopted the form and rhythm of a versified prose, and lost its appeal and the support of all but a very limited audience. Painting followed the curve of Cubist extravagance and espoused monstrosities of shape and suggestion. The ideal receded, and visible matter of fact was enthroned in its place, and encouraged an ugly realism and utilitarianism. In its war against religious obscurantism, science almost succeeded in slaying religion and the religious spirit. But philosophy had become too much a thing of abstractions, a seeking for abstract truths in a world of ideas and words, rather than what it should be, a discovery of the real reality of things, by which human existence can learn its law and aim, and the principle of its perfection. Poetry and art had become too much cultured pursuits to be ranked among the elegances and ornaments of life, concerned with beauty of words and forms and imaginations, rather than a concrete seeing and significant presentation of truth and beauty, and of the living idea and the secret divinity in things, concealed by the sensible appearances of the universe. Religion itself had become fixed in dogmas and ceremonies, sects and churches, and had lost, for the most part, except for a few individuals, direct contact with the living founts of spirituality. A period of negation was necessary. They had to be driven back and in upon themselves, nearer to their own eternal sources. Now that the stress of negation is past, and they are raising their heads, we see them seeking for their own truth, reviving by virtue of a return upon themselves and a new self-discovery. They have learned, or are learning, from the example of science, that truth is the secret of life and power, and that by finding the truth proper to themselves, they must become the ministers of human existence. But if science has thus prepared us for an age of wider and deeper culture, and if, in spite of, and even partly by its materialism, it has rendered impossible the return of the true materialism, that of the barbarian mentality, it has encouraged, more or less indirectly, both by its attitude to life and its discoveries, another kind of barbarism, for it can be called by no other name, that of the industrial, the commercial, the economic age, which is now progressing to its culmination and its close. This economic barbarism is essentially that of the vital man who mistakes the vital being for the self and accepts its satisfaction as the first aim of life. The characteristic of life is desire and the instinct of possession. Just as the physical barbarian makes the excellence of the body and the development of physical force, health, and prowess his standard and aim, so the vitalistic or economic barbarian makes the satisfaction of wants and desires and the accumulation of possessions his standard and aim. His ideal man is not the cultured or noble or thoughtful or moral or religious, but the successful man. To arrive, to succeed, to produce, to accumulate, to possess is his existence. The accumulation of wealth and more wealth, the adding of possessions to possessions, opulence, show, pleasure, a cumbrous, inartistic luxury, a plethora of conveniences, life devoid of beauty and nobility, religion vulgarized or coldly formalized, politics and government turned into a trade and profession, enjoyment itself made a business. This is commercialism. To the natural, unredeemed, economic man, beauty is a thing otiose, or a nuisance, art and poetry a frivolity or an ostentation and a means of advertisement. His idea of civilization is comfort, his idea of morals, social respectability, his idea of politics, the encouragement of industry, the opening of markets, exploitation, and trade following the flag. His idea of religion, at best, a pietistic formalism, or the satisfaction of certain vitalistic emotions. He values education for its utility in fitting a man for success in a competitive, or it may be a socialized, industrial existence. Science for the useful inventions and knowledge, the comforts, conveniences, machinery of production with which it arms him, its power for organization, regulation, stimulus to production. The opulent plutocrat and the successful mammoth capitalist and organizer of industry are the supermen of the commercial age, and the true, if often occult rulers of its society. The essential barbarism of all this is its pursuit of vital success, satisfaction, productiveness, accumulation, possession, enjoyment, comfort, convenience for their own sake. The vital part of the being is an element in the integral human existence as much as the physical part. It has its place, but must not exceed its place. A full and well-appointed life is desirable for man living in society, but on condition that it is also a true and beautiful life. Neither the life nor the body exist for their own sake, but as vehicle and instrument of a good higher than their own. They must be subordinated to the superior needs of the mental being, chastened and purified by a greater law of truth, good, and beauty, before they can take their proper place in the integrality of human perfection. Therefore, in a commercial age, with its ideal, vulgar and barbarous, of success, vitalistic satisfaction, productiveness, and possession, the soul of man may linger a while for certain gains and experiences, but cannot permanently rest. If it persisted too long, life would become clogged and perish of its own plethora, or burst in its straining to a gross expansion. Like the too massive Titan, it will collapse by its own mass. Mole ruet sua.